when they raided his house and they're going through all of his stuff, and then the person who he has a personal relationship with, I forget what her role was, but the person who's kind of in charge of serving the warrant, she's like, and there's going to be one more aspect that we're going to need. And I was like, oh my God, the paternity test. And I was like, how can he be expected to give a sperm sample at a time like that? And it was like, oh, he isn't, because that
That's
has
what I
nothing
thought
to do
too.
with
I
it.
was
Yeah.
like, is he gonna have to go to the bathroom right now? Like this, that would really take a lot of
Yeah.
will. Like,
Hey everybody, welcome to our channel. In this video and in this video series, we're going to be discussing all of our juicy theories and the details of Presumed Innocent on Apple TV, and we're very excited to get into it. We also have a podcast called Men's Search for Meaning, where we chat about and explore all kinds of relatable concepts and facts of life. So if you enjoy the discussion, then subscribe and be sure to check out some of our other videos on the channel. All right, episode 2, very exciting. They're kind of slow to get things going and giving you just a little bit at a time, but I feel like the morsels that they drop are so juicy that I'm really excited after this one, and my enthusiasm is rising as we get into um, the next episodes because of what's sort of unfolding. So you now have Rusty in custody, in Rustody, and and things are not looking good for him. There's all the family tension, and Barbara putting him on the spot to tell the kids what was going on. There's the all these different interpersonal and intrapersonal conflicts going on between Raymond and his wife, and all these different people involved have their own take on what's going on, and for some reason, I guess I just think they're doing a really good job with it. But what stood out to you most, or what's the point on top of your mind that you want to check in here with after seeing where things have gone in episode 2?
I tend to be most interested in like the people and the relationships and the psychology of what happens between people. So I'm once again finding myself wondering why Rusty was obsessed with Carolyn. Um,
Hmm.
he he did something that is getting him into, I would say, as bad as it was to have an affair and then to continue the affair after he said it was over. That's really
Yeah.
bad. He is getting a disproportionately bad reaction, assuming he didn't actually kill her, which I'm going with that right now. I have sympathy for him, like a not completely likable narrator. You know how that effect is. Sometimes you just have sympathy for the one who's the narrator.
Hmm.
Um, I do have that sympathy for him, and he is getting heavily punished for his misdeeds, to the point of being accused of of murder. Oh, let me actually throw this at you. Do you think that what's the chance? Give me a 1 to 100% chance that he killed her in your mind.
Well, it's very hard to say percentage. Um, I don't know that I can distill my thoughts into a percentage, but I can definitely try to answer the question. I think it feels almost impossible that he did it, because we're seeing so much of what his life is like on the inside, that if he were guilty, which they're kind of toying with us here, making him look guilty. Things are unfolding that are making him look worse and worse. So we're meant to extrapolate, I think, oh my God, what are they going to uncover next? Did he really do it? But if we ignore that aspect of the story and just look at the person himself, it would be completely unbelievable for me to see him as the murderer, for that to be unfolded because of how he's acting with his family. He's not just like kind of this hermit person who keeps to himself. It's like he's a very focal public figure in his own life, and therefore has to interact with tons of people. We're not seeing him be unemotional. If he were just unemotional in his reactions to things, I would tend to think, oh, this is someone who could be guilty. They don't seem to relate to the world the way that most people do. Perhaps he really could have done this somehow, but he's very strongly emotionally impacted. He was researching the case himself. So for me, with all those things, and probably other things that I'm noticing that I'm not able to put to words yet, I cannot see how it could be him. And so that would be the grandest twist of all. It might bother me if it was actually him, because it's like this was impossible to see, and I don't like when a show makes the conclusion just impossible to see. Like you could never have guessed it right because they withheld strategic information so that you would not be able to guess it. I don't like that. I like when all the facts are there and it's just difficult to put it together in the right way.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. It would discredit the show for me, at this point, unless something really changes and it's revealed that we could have maybe picked up on it a while ago,
Yeah.
that he killed her. I'd still put it at like 5% just
Yeah, it's
because,
possible.
it's right. It's a show that is meant to toy with you and make you think anything's possible. But
Yeah.
I agree. Why would he be genuinely seeming to do research? That's one of the biggest things about it. In addition to the fact that there's no alibi, I think that I would have expected the show, maybe if it was a lesser or more predictable show, to have her start dating somebody new just before she was murdered, and then
Hmm.
you start to have a little bit of like, okay, he might have been horribly jealous since
Jealous.
he
Yeah.
uh, loved her, was obsessed with her, all these things. But that, doesn't appear to be the case. So there's no alibi. His behavior points to someone genuinely, curious. Although I guess the one thing I would say is he didn't react as strongly to seeing someone that you're in love with bloodied on the ground, hogtied. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of was like, whoa. First of all, that would be shocking, but I guess not to him.
Yeah.
But if it's someone that you love, I mean, I would have expected him to need to run out or something.
We'll get right back to the video, but first we just want to remind you that if you're enjoying the discussion, to please like and subscribe, and also that we do a podcast on the channel called Men's Search for Meaning, where we explore and get into all kinds of relatable things about life. So if you want to spend some more time with us, check out those episodes too after this one, and let's get back to it. I think my take on that was some of it is his line of work. I'm sure he's seen all sorts of gruesome, grotesque photos of crime scenes and things. So there's a little desensitization there. Uh, Additionally, some people just, when faced with shocking details like that, just kind of shut down. It's like they can't process it into a way that makes sense, of being very visibly overwhelmed. It's just kind of like your computer crashes, in your brain, and you're just kind of like stunned until you can um, get somewhat of a grip on it and then start to process and have a reaction. So I can't rule that out as possible. And the piece you mentioned of her seeing someone shortly before being a potential motive, we can't rule out that they might bring that element in at any point now. They are really slowly peeling back just these thin layers one at a time to give you a bit more. So it's possible something like that could be coming up. The other thing I wanted to mention is you started out talking about the affair and really wanting to understand what was it. There has to be more than just a physical element here for it to be such a an experience that really overcame him. I guess I don't remember exactly your words, and something stood out to me in this episode in reference to that, which was he's having all these weird flashbacks. They seem to not be in a in chronological order. They seem like they're jumping all around, and they're doing that thing where you're like, is this now? Is this from before? And obviously, the flashbacks with her
Mhm.
are from before, but I feel like they're somewhat out of order at times because sometimes they just wanted to show you the passion. And but one that really stood out was there was a scene where they were in the office and they ended up having sex in the office, which I feel like for professionals of that caliber would have to be very spontaneous, very passionate kind of thing. And they show very shortly after him pounding his hand on the desk and her kind of looking
Mhm.
very solemn. And I'm thinking, what happened there? That seems to be like something they're planting this little seed of like, why is he upset? They showed other scenes where, after they had sex that they seemed very tightly bonded or very intimate afterwards, and this was one that stood out where he was visibly upset, which they're also showing he doesn't
Mhm.
have a isn't doing a great job handling his temper, and we don't really understand why, but he's kind of made some questionable choices. He's had a number of outbursts, which is a little surprising to me. But yeah, that moment of him pounding his hand on the desk really stood out to me in these flashbacks because it's like, what the hell was going on there? Surprising to me. Did you notice that when it was happening?
I noticed it, and I associated it with what I thought happened before, which is, her saying, like, "We gotta stop this because it's getting to the point we're too
Yeah,
emotionally attached and it's gonna hurt people."
yeah.
But is that not how you, saw it?
That's a possibility. I think I like to know with certainty, so I might suspect
Right,
it could be explained by that, but I want to know what it is. I want to actually have it confirmed without any doubt what that is
right.
before I feel convinced. So I think that's where I'm at. Something else I really want to mention. So we talked about in the first episode um, a theory we began to formulate. So Liam Reynolds in his courtroom sentencing flashback, he says, "There's two things I never forget: a face and people who fuck me over." And we're like, what an interesting thing for a guilty person to say, that he would consider himself being fucked over for being found guilty of the crimes that he committed. And that's a very strange thing. Additionally, he seems like a very calculated, smart person in a way. I really like the
Yeah,
acting of that character. I think that's a very fascinating portrayal of a character. And so there's something that stood out to me in this episode that potentially furthers the theory. I mean, this is just really trying to pull something out of thin air. We had talked about the theory that perhaps she was covering for him, or there was some understanding behind the scenes that no one else knew about. And she, at the last minute, perhaps went a different direction, perhaps to further her own career. You know, that she gets this big conviction. It looks good for her. She might try to leverage that into certain political aspirations, like they said that she had. And in this episode, we see Rusty reading through the report, medical examiner report for Bunny Davis, and seeing that there was a second sperm sample collected at the scene. And he is shocked to see this. He then goes to follow up with the doctor, and the doctor says, "Yeah, I guess you should have read the report. Carolyn knew this information." And then, Rusty has an outburst. There's a whole fallout from that. But what stood out to me, and what they confirmed with the flashback, is Carolyn seeing this information, and she kind of tucks it in her desk. It's like she's seeing something that she really wished she hadn't seen, was my take on it. And then tucking it in the desk, it's like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but symbolically it is kind of a concealment thing. And I think a lot of these shows really think about these nuanced details of how the character handles things, to try to have all these symbolic parallels going on at the same time. And so perhaps that's one. So it was just really exciting and interesting to see potentially that that theory has not been squashed yet. Perhaps she was into something shady in this situation. It's impossible to say how, because it's very hard to believe that that would be the case. But it does appear that, I mean, we can say for certain that the defense was not given this information. This information was withheld,
mhm.
and we can see how serious that is by Rusty's reaction. And so that was a decision made by Carolyn that Rusty was ignorant to. And why would that be? Right? So it was really exciting for me to see that our theory was substantiated in this very small way. We have no clue what's going on yet, but still, I picked up on that and I was like, all right, I kind of like to see this. We could be onto something here.
Well, I think you just gave the best reason. It would be to further her political aspirations by
Yeah.
not being, I don't know, deep into a trial and wanting to get that conviction as a prosecutor, and
Hmm.
then not being able to do it because of a confounding second sperm sample
Yeah.
that came in. Because they found the guy who's in jail, sperm there. I don't know why there's sperm there, but this is a
Yeah.
universal question about crime shows. But
Yeah.
um, they also found a second, which means that, it can't be clear without a shadow of a doubt that he was the murderer, which is the standard of evidence to convict him, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, so maybe she concealed it just so she could win the case, but that would be it'd show something about her. It'd be cold,
Yeah.
heartless, cruel, inhuman. Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes me think of something else, which is that when you're watching a show, a good show especially, I don't feel that there's much accidental or incidental information presented. Everything there was written. Whereas when you're experiencing your daily life, there's all kinds of accidental, incidental things there. Not everything is placed with this particular
Hmm.
intention, but in shows, you're viewing sort of the room of someone's mind, and they've chosen to put all the
Mhm.
pieces there, the way the house is decorated, all this kind of stuff. It's hard to control all this, but um, they went out of their way to talk about, to mention just in passing in a very small way that she had political aspirations of her own, when they were
Mhm.
uh, defining her character a bit. I think it was an interview maybe that Nico was giving. They mentioned that, and I'm like, I don't think they put that there for no reason. At the time it just
Right.
seems to
Right.
flesh her out a little bit as a person, but now I feel like that might have a double meaning, and it could be to support this theory. So I want to go too far off on a theory that we might just be pulling out of our butts here, but it's interesting to think about, and I think there is some potential. um Aside from that, the most personally interesting thing for me in this episode was the character development of Raymond. And I
Mhm.
immediately was incredibly excited. And I'm like, I am so on board with the show now. Like, that was the thing that just got that vacuum seal between me and this show and how excited I am for it. And that is, he seems to, he was a district attorney, so he had achieved a high level in his career, something that many dream of in that career but don't get, and he got that. However, he gets squeezed out in his own impression in kind of a shitty way, and he's really having a hard time with that. And now he's at a point in his life where he's like, is that it for me? Do I hang my coat up and go retire to Florida? And he's really grappling with that,
Mhm.
because at first, when Rusty asks him to represent him in this case, he's like, "Are you insane? Like, do you not respect me? How could you ask me that question?" And as he thinks about it, I think there's some excitement that's forming there, because he does show up, and perhaps he's just showing up to help his friend out, but he really shows up. I mean, the way he handled himself in the courtroom, we're kind of seeing a glimpse of the kind of lawyer that he was, so a bit of his legacy. And Rusty had said, you're the best lawyer that I know. There's something really exciting to me about the character who's kind of reaching a point where his career might be ending. He's getting older, this kind of change of life thing. And this is like, he seems to be approaching this as his last hurrah. If I can stick it to these two fucks on my way out, like, that would be a legacy,
Mhm.
and that is incredibly exciting to me. I feel like I want to watch it just for that, even, because it's kind of sophisticated that they would even have that sort of direction for a character in the first place. And I am just so excited to see how it unfolds, because it's like he's tapping into this power that he hasn't been able to tap into because something has made it very real for him. And I'm incredibly excited to see where that goes and how that unfolds. And that immediately I was like, this is my favorite character in the show, without question.
Mm.
I love that.
That's great. I love that. I love that you're highlighting that. And I actually kind of my excitement was awakened by that as well.
Yeah.
Before hearing your reasons for it, which I think I agree with, what I would have said is it arose kind of like a sports theme where there's like these fine-tuned athletes, and you want to see who's ultimately going to win. um, I think that in TV and film you see like everybody's fascinated by the concept of being super talented and what super talented people are like. That's the
Yeah.
reason why a movie like Goodwill Hunting is so fascinating. It's like, oh, what does a genius do, and
Yep.
up against other geniuses at MIT.
Perhaps
So,
our superhero
I
movie interest as well as a society. We want to just see these exemplary individuals.
yes, we do. We're fascinated. And I really hadn't thought that because we hadn't been shown it about Raymond
Hmm.
until, well, the first thing is that he showed up. He was like the bro of the century
Yeah.
in the way he showed up. Like he was waiting at the courtroom, and
Yep.
we're watching Rusty's life fall apart.
Yeah.
And if you're like me, you have sympathy for him, even in his awful imperfection.
Yeah.
And so you just see this guy where it's like, oh shit, he's got these two political opponents that just don't like him and are, jealous, don't like him, and now have enough evidence, sort of unfortunately for Rusty, that they could probably put him in jail for the rest of his life, which would be just a horrible robbing of this guy's life. And then here is this old dog that was about to go out to pasture,
Yeah.
and he's got some life left in him. and I didn't even quite connect with the idea of the guy that's retiring and still wants to know that he still has it, his last hurrah. But
Yeah.
once you mentioned that, I was like, yes, that too is. I wouldn't have thought that I'm so interested in that theme
Yeah.
because that's not the stage I'm at in my career,
Yeah.
or whatever, something I'm skilled at. But it is exciting to see somebody summon all their talent at a time when maybe it's laid dormant.
Yeah. Would you agree that they are, and I'll be very careful with my words, would you agree that they are intentionally making Tommy and Nico to be unlikable characters? Or do you think that's a stretch?
I think it's true to some degree, but I think the show is written sophisticatedly enough that I don't hate them. I dislike them,
Yeah, yeah.
but I don't it's like Nico just seems like a little bit like just a sleazy politician. Like anyone that's like a politician is unlikable. That'll just
Mhm.
say what they need to say on camera. And then maybe it's because like Peter Sarsgaard so much and I've always enjoyed him in movies that seeing Tommy, I don't hate him, but he relishes Rusty's pain too much. That makes me dislike him. So
Yeah.
overall, I dislike both of them, but they're not pure evil. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
like
yeah.
when they hammer a character that hard where it's like, okay, I get it. He's a one-dimensional, hateable,
Yeah.
person. They didn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely say this is a show of sophistication and very careful development, and it's so exciting to watch a show like that because whether you like the characters or not, whether you like the content of the show, just being able to see it for the expertise of storytelling and character development can be exciting in its own right, and I feel like that's definitely happening here because you're right that they're being, it's almost like you sense that they're unlikable characters, but you can't quite place it. You're like, are they? Is that just, am I just applying my own, am I projecting my own beliefs onto this? Or is that the way they're showing it? We're like Game of Thrones, Joffrey, one of the most hated characters of all time, super heavy handed
Yeah.
with that. This one, they're like, there's a lot of in this show. Is that it? Is that what's happening? Is that, am I
Right.
seeing this right? And I really like those subtleties there. So I think they're doing that with those characters. It's hard to say again if Rusty's meant to be a likable character, that he has redeeming qualities, but he's done a lot of things that are, most people admit are quite sleazy, and he seems affected by those things. As I mentioned before, if he was just immune to the hurt that he's causing, he would be very unlikable. But he seems deeply remorseful for his actions. Hard to say if that would change how he would act in the future. But yeah, it's a show of subtlety, and boy, am I enjoying that.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing that makes me like Nico more. I just painted him as a sleazy politician, but I just realized that when he was sort of reprimanding Tommy, saying, hold back
Yeah.
your emotion here, he showed integrity, and
Yes.
that's an unforgettable brushstroke there that the
Yes.
directors or writers did. He showed clear integrity. Let the evidence do the talking.
Yep.
And then, like I said, I also don't hate Tommy. I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of them becomes likable later, like in Game of Thrones, how Jamie Lannister becomes likable later in the
Yeah.
show.
His arc. Yeah.
His arc, yeah, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
That's a great point about Nico. And to me, that's some foreshadowing. This might be my own, or I think this is my own take at this point, but it's foreshadowing that Ami is having a hard time aligning his compass on this case. He has a lot of personal motivations that are inappropriate in this context for his position. He's like, what, the chief deputy inspector? I forget what his role was. It was a one that was new to me, but he got Rusty's
Yeah,
old job basically, which seems to be second in command under the district attorney, which is a very important role. They're showing that he is having a hard time with that, and his awareness is lacking as well. Whereas Nico's like, all right, let's calm down a little bit, you're pretty fired up there, and he's kind of like, no, I'm not. So he's lacking some
mhm,
of the self-awareness to see that he's doing that. And I predict that's going to be a big piece of this, whether it's a piece that is spread throughout many episodes or whether it just has one huge moment that changes everything. I think that's going to be coming back. And it seems to be, as much as they're showing Tommy and Nico to be these peas in a pod in a way, like, not, I wouldn't even say I could call them friends, but there's some weird bond that they have. I think it has the potential to undo that and put them at odds with each other because Nico's like, there's one way this is going to go and it's going to be by the book, and Tommy's like, I want to fucking take this guy down, even though he won't admit that. He keeps saying, I'm a professional, I understand. His actions say something different. He's really having a hard time letting go of this personal vendetta that I think is born from some kind of rivalry that they had. But yeah, good point about Nico,
Yeah.
and worth mentioning.
I want to mention something. There's a few other things, but one of them is Rusty's family and that dynamic. I think there's some interesting things there.
Totally.
So he became persona non grata. He was basically like, "Wow, you fucked up, Ed. Like I don't want to talk to you. You betrayed mom. You
Yeah.
betrayed our family. You went outside our family." And it's like, I get that. I also kind of feel for him because it's like this weakness. You're just like, he's a human and he failed, and because it's not my family, I can see that. I'm not like in it. I'd be just as mad if I was one of his kids.
Yeah.
So, you're just like, wow, he is just going to get loaded on at a time when he feels horrible. He's about to go to jail, get arrested
Hmm.
or whatever, and have this horrible thing exposed. And his, personal flaws and failings are about to, be estered in the national news. I mean, that just sucks.
Yeah.
And yet he then has to have a horrible treatment in his family, deservedly, but it just sucks for him.
Yeah.
But what's happening is so big, and the love his family has for him is still there, mostly his kids, but also his wife. She's
Yeah.
showing pretty high
She hasn't
integrity,
left. She
I'd
could have
say.
left.
Right, right. She talked about it, which is realistic, but she hasn't. And they had that moment of like family togetherness when he was out on bail, and even in the courtroom when when Raymond got him the quick trial,
Hmm.
where they were like, "All right, we got to maybe we got something good happen, a little port in the storm."
Yep.
And I enjoyed that there was something bigger than the horribleness of what he did and the guilt that he was going to have to wallow through that
Yeah.
could bring them together. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, they are a very interesting family in that regard, and there are surprising elements. That his daughter didn't want to speak to him, gets arrested, comes home, then she's like, "Oh, seems like some good luck on the judge you got," and there is a very strong bond there that it's being challenged, but between all members, the two siblings have a lot of closeness. Uh, Barbara and the kids have a lot of closeness. Barbara and Rusty have a lot of closeness despite what's going on. So there's a lot of different bonds that are all adding together to form a very surprisingly cohesive family, and I do think that's interesting to watch. Something I can't help but remember. Funny moment for me. So there was so much talk of sperm samples. Yeah, my wires got across my brain. There's so much talk of sperm samples and these being a really significant aspect of the episode. And then there's the paternity aspect, of him essentially getting Carolyn pregnant, and sperm is involved in that as well. That when they raided his house and they're going through all of his stuff, and then the person who he has a personal relationship with, I forget what her role was, but the person who's kind of in charge of serving the warrant, she's like, and there's going to be one more aspect that we're going to need, and I was like, oh my god, the paternity test, and I was like, how can he be expected to give a sperm sample at a time like that? And it was like, oh, he isn't, because that
That's
has
what I
nothing
thought
to do
too.
with
I
it.
was
Yeah.
like, is he going to have to go to the bathroom right now? Like that would really take a lot of
Yeah.
will. Like, it's like that may be near impossible.
Yeah.
But
Your life is falling apart. Go masturbate, and we'll be waiting outside. Or like someone needs to be in the bathroom with you, so you can't so you can't fake this.
the most solemn masturbation of all time. Oh god,
So
it's horrible.
yeah, that was just
Um,
so funny. And then I was like, "Oh, you idiot! It's a cheek swab. You don't need to give a sperm sample."
I thought it was that too. I
Yeah.
was
Oh
like,
my god.
what's about to happen?
Yeah.
Um, there was something else I wanted to mention.
Got very serious all
I
of a
guess I want.
sudden.
Yeah. No, there's so many interesting things about this because I loved this episode.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, just the aspect of the sympathy. I'm curious if you felt the level of sympathy for him, which then resulted in tremendous relief in certain moments. So the the showing up of Raymond for him gave me a huge feeling of relief. Like, wow, oh my God, his friend was there for him. His friend has a deep meaning related interest in doing so. So it wasn't just being a friend, but
Yeah,
still
yeah.
the feeling of like walking in there being like, I'm going to have some court appointed, public lawyer that's like a newbie or something,
Mhm.
and it's actually like, this badass district attorney who's your bro. That was amazing. And then also the judge, I don't know if you had a feeling after the judge was just like, I don't want any pomp. Like, let's actually be serious about this and make this a real trial. It's not about politics. This is a serious matter. This man's life is at stake here.
Mhm.
I really appreciated that, both because it was a very ethical and high integrity thing to do, but
Yeah.
also, like, he was getting a little break from, you know, possibly being, like, mostly politically persecuted or personally
Yeah.
persecuted, and,
Well, it became
so yeah,
about
it's sympathy, it was relief.
yeah, it became about fairness at that point because while
Mhm.
our justice system is based on innocent until proven guilty, in in the mainstream culture, it's guilty until proven innocent. It's like an allegation surfaces about someone doing something, celebrity doing something, and people immediately are like, cancel this person. This is the end for them. What a piece of shit. And it's like, I can understand the frustration there, but I do think that innocent until proven guilty is a really important piece of the way that justice works. And there's that's often not the case. And so I think this was kind of a breath of fresh air because we're all used to that. We all experience that in ways, even if we're not consciously thinking about it. And what we saw here was like, yeah, he does get some credibility for all the things that he's done well and the person that he is. It's not just like immediately there's some suspicion of him doing something wrong and now he's a piece of crap thrown in the trash and that's it. We don't even need to take it to trial because obviously he did it. So we're seeing that there's a fairness there and I think it's just nice to see that even if you make mistakes, you have other aspects to your humanity, and those do count for something. We tend to be very simplistic in terms of the reputation that we ascribe to someone. And yeah, I think it was nice to see like, oh, there's actually the ability for this to be handled fairly. He is being respected for his reputation of doing a lot of things right and being a respectable person in the community. There's more to him than just the most recent thing that's happening. And I think that's
Yes.
important. I think people reject that idea a lot, but I think it's important. And he can still be guilty. If the facts prove him guilty, that's great. It's not like you can't ever think bad things about him because he's done good things. If he's deemed guilty of the crime, then yeah, the labels would be appropriate. But let's hear the evidence first.
Yeah. Well, I think you're even underselling the fact that he's presumed to be innocent. Like, the presumption of innocence is one of the underpinnings of Western democracy. It's one of like the most wonderful things about any free society.
Hmm.
Because if we thought about the opposite and how it would be taken advantage of, anyone in law enforcement, it could then, take out anyone they don't like or political
Yeah.
opponents. That way, I mean, it's tremendously important in ways you'd have to study to really get to, and it's the name of the show. So I think
Yeah.
we're onto something bigger, at least in terms of what the writers wanted, than it may seem. Because for me, I was just like, that was relieving.
Hmm.
Fairness. I like how you put it, seeing fairness. And I also want to say, in the current world we live in the election year that we're in right now, as of this taping,
Yeah.
um, there's so much just reputational attack where the actual facts don't seem to matter that much, and it would just
Hmm.
be so nice. I think many of us crave old-fashioned, just like reasonable, thoughtful, consider the facts, consider the entire situation of someone's life and their actions.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing it at all. We're just in this like crazy show that doesn't have to do with most of us, but is pretty vitriolic.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a relief.
Well, that's where it's not about facts because that's one of the really unique things and kind of one of the irritating things about a court of law in a way. It's like everything is so methodical. so carefully handled that it moves very slowly, but that's the way to really prove something. Can there be mistakes? Yes, there are mistakes all the time, but I think it's trying to do the best that we can. And when you talk about, the political landscape, it's really not about facts. It's, can you get people to believe you? Are you saying something that people want to hear? But if political debates were to happen in a court of law with the same rules there, you would have to prove that what you're saying is true. You can't just say it and with
Mhm.
conviction, and that makes it true. So that's something that's refreshing about the way a courtroom works. It's like, substantiate it or it isn't true. It's deemed
Well,
untrue until you can prove it factual. There is some sway of like
yeah.
the reasonable doubt, and it's not all totally concrete, but I think as much as possible it's a very concrete way of handling things, and we're not used to that in most cases.
Yes. Yeah, I would just add that, I would say a lot of courtrooms are not like that, so I would
Mm,
say this courtroom is acting that way, and I
sure.
think many courtrooms do,
High
but,
stakes
I
courtroom,
think many
maybe.
courtrooms do. A high stakes courtroom, or one in which the judge, like, remembers what they learned in law school and the bedrock principles of the law,
Yeah.
and of what it means to have the responsibility of being a judge or a jury member or whoever,
Mm,
and, I think many people just long for fairness is a very um, kind of emotionally laden idea because we all want it,
mhm.
and so I think the show is doing a wonderful job of presenting a lot of opportunities for us to see fairness and recognize it and appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
think
like that.
that does seem to be a core element in the show, and perhaps why they've chosen the context of a courtroom, because it operates in a very unique way, and truth is very important. Verifiable truth is very important. And it explores a different way of looking at things, and it also shows that you can't ever, well, you can at sometimes prove things, but it's really about, can you sway the opinion there? Can you present a case that makes things look a certain way? And so something I see here is the potential for um, an innocent person to go to prison, or a guilty person to go free. We've seen instances of that at various times, and I think that will be a theme here, because if you are writing the show, that is way too juicy to avoid, because it's like, it's an exploration at kind of a terrifying concept that a a guilty monster could roam free, and an innocent person could be locked up, or even given the death penalty. That's almost more scary than any horror movie because it has to do with
Yeah,
your
yeah.
perception of safety and your perception of freedom, which are tremendously important to us. I think we're going to see a lot of those unique themes of this very specific context explored on an ongoing basis throughout the episode, because there's too many good ones there to not pass up. And if you're writing this show, I think you're aware of that, and you're like, "Ooh, what can we pull in here next?" So I feel like that kind of takes it full circle. Are there any other key things that you want to come back to before we wrap there? That just seems kind of like a tidy place to end episode 2. What do you think?
You're gonna kill me. I got one other,
Okay, go for it.
just one last.
Yeah.
Uh, when Raymond says to his wife, "Well, it would be nice to have some meaning in my life," or something like that, and you're just
Yeah.
like, "Oh boy, did you
So,
just say that?" I just wanted to, yeah, go
did
ahead,
you did you
continue.
hear that as a slight to her? Were you like, "Oh my god, how are you going to say that in front of your wife?" Or
Yeah, I heard it as both things. I heard it as him being genuine, saying something he really means, but
yeah.
doesn't quite mean it the way it came out. And how would you not hear it the way she heard it?
Yeah, I didn't hear it that way. I
Okay,
I saw
how
it
did you
when
hear
she
it?
said it. I just thought he was I just saw, like, here's a man being very personally vulnerable, and real, like, he's very self-absorbed in that moment, but we all are at times. I don't fault him for that, because we need to be self-absorbed at
Right.
times. That's how we process things. And I just saw a guy who's like, is this really the end of my career? So I think there's a place to be self absorbed and still to have an immense love for people in your life. It's just, in that moment, he was just like personally reflecting. And I thought it was odd that she took it personally. In retrospect, I can see how
Mhm.
that happens, but I thought it was a little bit interesting. There seemed to be a potential sensitivity there on her part, that she doesn't, she feels maybe a little bit insecure in the relationship or something, for her to go there quickly, because I think there's a way to hear that, of just like, oh, this person's processing. I know, I'm confident in their feelings for me, but it was interesting to see the two potential possibilities there.
Yeah, well, she does seem pretty critical of him all the time. She's kind of on him.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you get being a district attorney's wife. Like, she's going to be on you too. She's not going to let you just get away with being the argument winner all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I, yeah, I don't agree that it may have been overly sensitive because it's the way he phrased it. I agree completely with your sentiment that it's very makes a lot of sense that someone would say, "I don't want this to be the end of my career. My career is a huge piece of the meaning in my life, and I want a last hurrah." And him just to be talking about that, yeah, that's very understandable. But I think the specific way he phrased it was like, "I'm not going to have any other meaning without this." I forget exactly what he said, but it specifically, indicated like just being with her and going to Florida would be a life devoid of meaning. I'm sure he
Mm,
didn't mean that, but he
yeah.
did, I believe, say that.
Yeah.
So that's why, it's like it's maybe not a time when you would think to be a little more complex or nuanced in your thinking and say, well, this is a huge piece of meaning my career, but there's also my relationship with you.
Yeah.
Uh, so it didn't come out right, I think, but I don't know. That could be its own conversation, maybe for a different time of like, how does a person derive meaning, career, or maybe a man specifically, like career versus relationships, and how men often do that. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe more so for men. I can't confidently say that for everybody, but there seems to be sort of
Right.
a glory aspect or a very achievement based aspect. Whereas, not that this is true for everyone, but perhaps stereotypically for some women, relationships are more important. And, fostering that sort of nuclear family unit is an important piece. So I can definitely see where you're coming from. It just didn't stand out to me that way at first. And then she responded, and I was as surprised as he was, where he's like, "Oh, of course I care about you. I'm just talking about my own
Right.
side
Right.
of things." So yeah, that
Yeah. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
an interesting moment, and I can definitely see where you're coming from. Um, what was our cliffhanger?
Uh, it was quite the cliffhanger, so I should definitely remember it.
Oh yeah,
We
the
both should.
text. He gets the text saying, "I saw you.
Oh
You were
yeah.
there," or something like, "You were there. I saw you," from
Yeah.
not a blocked number. It was from just a regular phone number. So you'd think someone
Mhm.
with his resources could figure out who that is, but it's an interesting new piece that's entering. Like, someone's watching him. Is this an indication that he is guilty and someone is aware of this guilt, or is that what we're supposed to think? We don't know yet, but yeah, an interesting new piece has entered, and I'm sure episode three will pick up there. So very excited to see where that goes and to watch these different threads that we've picked up and isolated continue. So if you guys watching are enjoying the conversation, let us know your thoughts below. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to see the rest of this series, but we really want to hear from you. Additionally, as we mentioned before, we have a podcast called Men's Search for Meaning, where we take a similar degree of analysis, but applied to different relatable aspects of life that we think we all have in common, and we try to take those a bit further than most people might think about. So, if you're interested in the way we talk about things and reflect on them, check those out as well. We think you'll enjoy it, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.